Israel is known as the startup nation, and it is innovative in so many areas. But when it comes to food and the security of food, there are deep problems. Joining me is Joseph Gittler, who heads the National Food Bank of Israel, Leket. How did you get to a point after all these years of trying to save food that in 2024 there was a huge amount, 40% of all of Israel's food goes to waste?
Thanks for having me on, Felice. This is not uniquely an Israeli problem, which I don't know if I'm happy to say that or unhappy to say that this is a worldwide issue in the West. I wish we were better than everyone, but we aren't. There's some cultural reasons. People want to show abundance. Um, we call it the land of milk and honey. So we want to show that that's the truth, and that's an accomplishment for a country that until 30 years ago was a lower middle class country. And so the possibilities of even having food to waste is something relatively new to this country. That doesn't excuse behavior. And I am certainly very concerned by the amount of food waste that happens in this country. I'm thankful that Leket is fighting it and is rescuing that food to feed the poor. But I think there's a better middle ground that we could find where there's less waste, but also enough food left over that we can also take care of those in need.
Joseph, let's just break it down a little. There was over 400,000 families, right, that did not have access to the appropriate kind of food as well. So when you're looking at food waste, you're also looking at the fact there are a lot of people that are in need too, that are not getting their daily amount of appropriate food is probably the best way to put it, nutritional food.
That's correct, especially in a Western country like Israel, which has the right food mix to feed its entire population properly. We don't need to feed junk to those in need. So it's a real scandal when healthy, safe, nutritious fruits and vegetables and cooked meals just end up in landfills when they could take care of the poor. And as we all know, highly processed foods, which are generally less healthy, just because of amazing gains in productivity, are often cheaper than the foods they're made from, which is, it's hard to get your head around it. Sometimes it's something that can go through processing should be cheaper than the actual thing that goes into it. But that is the case worldwide. And so we have focused our energies over the years solely on healthy, nutritious food because that's what's needed. And with the limited dollars we have to run our operation, we want to make sure to get the most bang for the buck nutritionally and, of course, efficiently as well.
The viewers need to understand when we talk about that abundance of waste, what does that mean? Restaurants throwing out food, individuals, which we do, waste food every single week, things rot, you overbuy. There are many things that go into this. Can you try to dissect that for the population?
Yeah. So first of all, it's everywhere along the chain, from growers to manufacturers to catering to retail and to the home. So let's reverse that. The home is where they claim, the experts, 50% of food waste happens in the home. Um, that is a cultural issue which needs to change. That's an educational issue which needs to change. And people need to pay attention to their pocketbook. It's just that's money literally leaving your pocket and going in the garbage, which I find so painful. If you start doing the math, it's kind of like somebody who smokes and they want to quit smoking. Sometimes the secret is explaining to them, do you know you could have bought a second apartment if you hadn't smoked all those years? It's kind of the same with food waste. So I'm hoping people start to look at it that way. There is some good news. In our most recent food waste report, we did note about a 10% drop in what people are wasting in the home. Okay. The problem in Israel is the population. Well, it's a good thing the population has grown dramatically, but it means we're still wasting way more food in our homes just per person. That's dropped a bit. And then along the food chain, so you have hotels, you have caterers, you have corporate cafeterias. Everyone's worried that when the customer comes, they might run out of food. And so there's always 10, 20, 30% more than is needed because of that fear. And therefore, we're there, thankfully, though, to make sure that that food doesn't go to waste. Somewhere around 15,000 meals a day that we're rescuing from partners like that throughout the country. Our biggest project, though, is the work we do with the farming community. Farming really is key here because that is what really feeds the state of Israel. And again, this middle ground of trying to keep farmers in business, make sure they profit, but on the other hand, keeping prices in an expensive country affordable to the poor. And that's a constant challenge, I would say, with no great answers for the government. And every time the weight tilts towards one, someone starts fighting and someone starts blaming each other. And that's why, again, it's so important that Leket has grown this project dramatically, where this year we should get to about 35,000 tons, about 75 million pounds of fruits and vegetables that we're rescuing that simply would have been plowed over or would have rotted on the trees or fallen on the ground. And that's going to 350 agencies throughout the country, our partners, and ultimately, and most importantly, feeding about 400,000 needy Israelis every week.
It's a very important organization, and my hat's off to you, especially this holiday season. But let's bring in the government. They failed at this. I mean, it's year after year where there just aren't laws that are imposed that are not facilitating what they should be in terms of policy. What is on the horizon?
First, I'll compliment the government on a few laws that have been passed. We, together with the government, did pass two laws. One protects food donors from legal liability, and a new one that we passed a year and a half ago, which requires government entities to make best efforts to donate their excess food. And we've seen a big uptick from government entities in Israel donating food. So that's something. Let's give them. It's hard, no one ever wants to say anything nice about the government, but let's give them something.
The Minister of Environment just came in and said not enough is being done, and she
Oh,
was
I
adamant.
and I agree. So we need carrots and we need sticks. I'll give some examples. So, let's take retailers. Okay. So there are different methods. You can do the stick method, which is if retailers don't make best efforts to donate their excess food and they have massive amounts of excess food. The difficult part at retailers, it's store by store as opposed to going to one farmer, right? And that's why we haven't focused on that with our energies and our organization. But if there's a stick, and the stick could be, if you don't make best efforts, we will fine you. Okay. And that's been passed. France, for example, has a law like that on the books. We'd like to see things like that, or vice versa. Instead of the stick, the carrot. Give them greater incentives to donate their food, bigger tax breaks. Um, and there's ways of doing that. That's what they do in Mexico, as an example. We'd like to see more action in that area. I'll add one other thing we'd like to see more of, and that is a government policy which adds to the rescue that Leket's doing, where the government, like in the US, actually purchases excess crops to feed the poor. Now, again, you have to find a good middle ground because if there's too much of that, then farmers may grow things that aren't necessarily right to be growing in this country. Okay. Water is expensive here. Yes, we've solved our water problems at a great environmental and financial cost. So, all these things need to go together in this kind of human algorithm that will help us solve problems. We need to be smart about our imports because we do need to import sometime crops. But how do we do that when the farmers need the business who are growing locally? So these are real issues for the state of Israel, ones that need to be thought of thoughtfully and carefully and be on the top of the agenda all the time.
You touched on something very important that has to do with the price of food, and it has gone up tremendously in Israel. How has the war impacted food prices?
Okay, so not surprisingly, food prices are up. They've come down a bit at the height. Produce, which is our main focus, was up about 30%. So that's come down dramatically, but not completely. It's always hard to get rid of price increases completely. We're seeing what we see everywhere in the world, shrinking food sizes, trying to keep prices the same, but you shrink the size of the container. We're seeing that in this country as well. Um, we have we have monopolies here, as we all know, and they're aggressive, and we're seeing price increases. They'll say it's the shekel dollar, and then the shekel becomes strong, and they won't. It's kind of like the airlines. Even when oil prices go down, they don't get rid of that extra oil fee because once you've included a fee, it's hard to get rid of. So we're seeing a lot of that here. Again, it's bigger than Leket. it's government policy, and we're seeing again there's some good things that are happening. Pressure, um, import. Look, there's a battle going on now, and I don't like to take sides because that's too dangerous. But there's a battle going on with milk production now, right? You've probably reported on it now. Nothing is right or wrong. It's just who's it good for? Who's it not good for? That's always the way it is. And so the job is, and here it's complicated because we at the end of the day have to remember the Jewish people, the state of Israel, we have a history like no others, unfortunately. And so we really do have to take into account in ways I think other countries don't our nutritional security. So it may mean that we're always going to pay a little extra for things. We're never going to be Berlin and we're never going to be the US. It's always going to be more expensive here. And that's because we're a small country. We're a small country that is always has to be, especially now after what we've been through the last 2 years, we always have to have a bit of a fear of the world turning on us. And the world could turn on us and suddenly we could have real nutritional issues in this country. So we need to be nutritionally independent on the one hand, but somehow relatively affordable on the other. Okay. And it's really hard to balance these issues. But one thing I'll say, despite everything I said, we still see poor people who also waste food, which is really an incredible thing to say after everything I said. People who don't even have the money to waste. It's one thing, not that I accept it, right? It doesn't matter who you are. No one has a right to waste food. But then you see it from people who can't afford it, and you just say, I don't get it.
The holiday season is a time when people, and the Sabbath is a time when people spend a lot of money on food. So many families might say a good chunk of their salary goes to spending on their family for a Sabbath meal. And I've heard that many a times. Much has to be wasted. And if you had to point to one thing that an individual can do to help feed someone else, what would that be?
One way is volunteering for Leket. That puts food on people's tables. Supporting Leket is another way of putting food. And I would say a third, and this goes to the home. Okay. You can find, I know in my own house, on Sundays, we have one or two people in the community where I live who we know need help. They know us, they trust our food. And so we've made it our business. Sure, my kids will eat leftovers for one or two meals. And at the same time, we know, okay, what do we need for the leftovers in our own home? So if you are going to overproduce in your house and overspend in your house, please don't let it go to waste. Share it with friends, share it with neighbors. Most important, share it with those who need it.
If you had to compare Israel to another country that it should strive for in terms of less waste in food, what would it be?
So it's interesting you asked me that because today I was on a Zoom with a German woman who lives here in Israel. And she pointed out to me everything we talk about here just doesn't happen in Northern Europe. Germany, the Netherlands, they just have a different, and we could talk about history if we want to, but I think they just, because, let's say, post World War II, they just have a different view on food, like Holocaust survivors who are, or older Israelis who went through the Tzena, who went through rationing, older British people who went through that. They can't even understand the way the modern state of Israel or the United States waste food. And so the culture still exists. But it's a hard culture to fight. I grew up in the 80s with a mother who said, there's starving kids in Ethiopia, finish your plate. So somehow that bore a hole in my head, and that maybe partially led to why we're here today. But as a culture, there are countries where people are much more careful in their purchasing, whereas it's a societal no-no to waste food. And let's not forget, while Leket is not a religious organization, we're an Israeli organization, a secular organization. It's very clear in the Bible. We have a commandment, Bal Tashchit, not to waste. And somehow, among many commandments that have been forgotten over the years, that one really, sticks to me in a very difficult way. Um, Modern Western societies have forgotten that commandment, and we need to start coming back towards that because everything's connected. We're talking about poverty, we're talking about food waste, but when you waste food, you waste energy, you waste water, and so many other things along the way. So we do need to change the way we treat this planet and the way we treat others, and of course, the way we treat food, which maybe is just too easy for us to get today. Maybe we need to go back in time a little bit.
Before I let you go, you didn't finish your sentence, and that was about how you got into Leket, because you
Oh
you, you
boy.
kind of gave part of that.
Sorry about so when I saw this disconnect between waste and poverty, I basically took a sabbatical from what I was doing and I said, what can I do to help? And then I remembered growing up in New York, City Harvest, and I remembered from Toronto, Second Harvest Canada. And I said, there are organizations in this world already that make sure that healthy excess food doesn't go to waste. So I got on a plane and I went to visit those organizations who were more than happy to share their knowledge. It's not like the business world, much more open world. And I just got to work. That was 22 years ago in my car, going to event halls at night. And from there, we expanded to corporate cafeterias and army bases and hotels. And then we got into farming. And it's really just gone from strength to strength over the years to the point where it's a gorilla as an organization. It's uh, a big growing organization with a lot of responsibility, a lot of people who count on us. And because we're highly leveraged, and I'll explain what I mean by that, in the sense that for every dollar we spend, we bring in about $5 worth of food. So we're always aggressively looking to grow because we feel that it's a very good use of charitable dollars. So we're looking to put new trucks on the road. We're looking to expand our reach. We're looking to add new agencies. We want to have more volunteers. We've had over 100,000 volunteers this year. We can have more. There's so much more to do because we still estimate that maybe we're getting to 20% of the food waste in this country. And that's a scary thought, considering how much I see going through our distribution points and our trucks on a daily basis.
Joseph Gittler, I wish you a lot of success in helping to feed Israel's not just poor, but also just helping to feed those that aren't getting enough nutrition too. And praying that there'll be less waste, I think, around the world is a good thing to look forward to and strive for this holiday season.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and wishing everyone happy holidays.
Thank you.